everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk about my recent and current reads. It's been a little while, I think maybe a week and a half or so since, well, basically since the 1st of April, since I checked in with what I'm currently reading. And I've finished 5 books so far already in April. Of course, now some of those I was reading at the end of March and they've slipped into April so far. So, but still, I think that's really good. It really bodes well for my reading. So let's just get into it. The first book that I've completed so far this month is The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham. I had talked about this, I think, in my last video. This is a modern classic, basically, from the 1920s, all about this young woman named Kitty who finds herself at, like in her early 20s, like 23 or something like that. She's going to be left on the shelf. Her younger sister is going to get married before she does, and so she jumps at the first offer of marriage that she receives once she finds out her younger sister is due to get married. And this means that she marries a man who is a scientist living in Hong Kong, and I'm not sure, I don't even remember now what his name is. And it doesn't really matter because this book is all about Kitty. And I really, really like this book. So she marries this man. She heads off to Hong Kong. And he, is it Hong Kong? Yes, Hong Kong. He, while they're in Hong Kong, she has an affair. And her husband finds out about it. And so in punishment, basically, he decides to take her and head off into the hinterlands of China where there's a cholera epidemic ongoing. Because that's what he does for his work. He's an epidemiologist, and so he's going to go out into the wilds and do some science on this epidemic, and he's going to drag her along with him because basically he's mad at her, and maybe he even wants her to die. We don't know. So I don't really want to go into it any more than that, but I will say that Kitty is a fascinating character, and I think Mom does a really fantastic job of writing this young, selfish woman who thinks only of her own pleasure until she's like basically hauled up short and said, made to face the effects of her own actions, like basically made to stand up to what she's done and take the consequences. And I just found it fascinating. And you may think that a book about a cholera epidemic is not something you want to read during a pandemic, but I just found this extremely atmospheric, page-turnery, an excellent book, so well written, and a really fascinating character in Kitty, and some excellent characters that surround her as well. I will say that this is a book of its time, and how the English characters here, because Kitty and all the folks that she, in her social circle, are British, and how the British talk to and treat the Chinese is horrific, but I think it is very much a product of that time. So just be aware of that before you go into this one. I then finished my first book for this round of the BookTube Prize, and that was Read at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. So obviously can't talk about that. Just want to note that I read it. And then I finished a book that I had started in March for March Mystery Madness, and that's Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This is a story, this is contemporary fiction, just came out this year. I wanted to read it because I really liked Liz Moore's previous book, The Unseen World. Loved that book. So good. So I definitely wanted to read this one. This book is quite different. It takes place in Philadelphia, in like basically a rundown ghetto neighborhood of Philadelphia. And our main character, the perspective that this book is told from is from Casey's perspective, and she's a cop in this area of Philadelphia, and she has a sister who's a drug addict, and her sister has gone missing. And so Casey is using her, Casey is the drug addicted sister. Mickey is the policewoman, and she's using her police skills and her time as a police officer basically to try to track down what's happened to her sister, Casey. This book also is very atmospheric, and it is a mystery, but it's not typical like plot-driven, fast-paced mystery that you might expect from a more typical police procedural. This is more in the vein of like a Tanya French or a Louise Penny type novel, where it's very it's more about the language and the character development and all that. I think there's a lot more heft to it, I guess is what I would say, than your fast-paced thrillers or anything like that. So you might get frustrated with the pacing of this book, but I really enjoyed it. It is written with short, choppy chapters, which does help propel you along. And I was really fascinated by the story of Mickey and her sister Casey, and sort of you're in the present day, and then you're also having chapters that go back in time and sort of tell the story of their childhood and how they got to where they are today and all that sort of thing, which I found really, really interesting. And I really like this book, and it's very dark though, because not only does it deal with missing person and drug addiction and how young women who work in the sex trade are treated, and police corruption and all these sorts of things, so it's dark topics. So this is not a light, fluffy read at all, but I did enjoy it very much. I then finished Pandemic by Sonia Shah. I had picked this one up last week because I wanted to do a reread of it. I had read this book previously a few years ago. It's a 5-star nonfiction read for me, and it continues to be in that category for me. This is really basically laying it all out on the line about how pandemics work, and the author uses cholera as the lens with which to explore different facets of pandemics, from how viruses replicate, to how they spread in communities, to how governments and nations deal with the spread of disease or don't deal with the spread of the disease. And I found it really enlightening, again, the second time around, helpful to me in sort of placing what we're going through today in a more historical, larger context. And anytime I read something that basically reminds me that even though it seems like what we're dealing with is the first time this problem has ever been encountered in the human race, it's very often not. And it's certainly the case with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not the first time that the world has had to deal with the spread of infectious disease. And this book helps place what we're going through in context. I highly recommend this. If you're the type of person that likes to ground themselves in facts and science, I think this book does the job admirably. And then the last book that I finished so far in April this month is a romance novel called Devil's Daughter by Lisa Kleypas. This is book 5 in the Ravenel series. I've been buddy reading this with Doris and Katie, and we're just simply, it's just so delightful. We're just enjoying it so much. It's such a good read for the time. It's relaxing, it's funny, it's sweet, all of these things. I really enjoyed Devil's Daughter. For me, it was probably just a little bit below book 4, which you know how much I had loved that book. But Devil's Daughter, we follow the female protagonist that is the heroine of the book is part of a group of family from a previous series that Lisa Kleypas had written, the Wallflower series. This is a daughter from that group of families, and she ends up she's a widow, and she comes to a wedding and meets West, who is the brother there, couldn't think of the word, brother of the one of the heroes from a previous book in this series. So, we've got lots of reoccurring characters, which is always fun. West is a great character. He has his demons. He's a rake who's trying to be reformed, and he doesn't think he's good enough and all that sort of thing. And his heroine, who I'm blanking on her name right now, isn't that awful? I just finished reading this book, but you know me, I'm terrible with names. Anyway, she's a widow, and so of course she has 2 young sons, and she's dealt with men for a long time, and she knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to go after it. And I just loved her. I loved their relationship together. Again, two equals meeting in a romance. None of this, patronizing bullshit that I hate in romance novels. Just two adults, getting to know one another, falling in love, and dealing with their problems like adults. It was very, very good and refreshing. Loved it. So those are the things that I've finished so far this month. Then I am currently reading 3 books only. Can you believe it? I mean, it's like unheard of for me to only be reading 3 books right now, but I'm sure that will pick up. My buddy read right now is The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wulf. This is Alexander von Humboldt's New World. This is nonfiction, all about Alexander von Humboldt, who was a naturalist in the early 1800s, and he is sort of the father of the current environmental movement. He was the first person to sort of see the connections between all living things and to talk about how everything is interrelated and we can't just separate out one living creature from another. We have to look at how everything interacts. You can see that I'm tabbing away like mad. This is so well written, so interesting, so fascinating, so many awesome details about Humboldt's adventures and explorations through, right now he's in South America, but he's going to be headed off into other places around the world throughout this book, and it's just really, really fun. Enjoying this one so much. I am listening to, on audio, Kingdom of Copper by S.J. Chakraborty. Doing S.A. Chakraborty. I'm doing that as a buddy read with Lindsay. This is book 2 in the Davabad trilogy, which is a fantasy trilogy. So I can't really talk about this one very much because that would be spoilers. But I will say that it's fantasy set in a Middle East setting with jinn and Ifrits and other sort of Middle Eastern folklore perspectives. Really great characters, really awesome setting, very good writing, super interesting, really loving it. We're just a little bit, like maybe 25% of the way into that one so far. But it's very good. Really enjoying it. And then my third book that I'm reading right now is another book 2 prize book. I started The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. So that's it. That's what I'm currently reading and what I've just finished. So far, so good. Knock on wood. April is going very well for reading. I'm starting to get my concentration back. I'm starting to be able to set aside what is happening in the wider world for longer periods of time and enjoy reading and other activities, which is awesome. Getting into my routine and working from home and really starting to adapt to that quite well, I think, although I very, very, very much miss being out in the field, but it is what it is. And I hope that you are all doing well and finding some good books to read. I'll talk to you later.